Welcome, FinTech Talkers, to an all-star edition of the FinTech Talk Show. I'm your host, Patty. Today, we're diving deep into the state of AI, exploring the latest developments, unpacking what they mean, mapping out where we go from here. We're thrilled to have an exceptional panel of experts joining us, the all-star team. Amy, my good friend Amy Oldenburg, she's managing director at Morgan Stanley's Asset Management Group, where she leads the emerging markets equity team, offering invaluable insights on how AI is reshaping emerging markets. We'll love to hear on the impact of AI in the emerging markets. Lex Sokolin, a LinkedIn top voice, CEO of the FinTech Blueprint and managing partner at Generative Ventures. Be sure to check out his thought-provoking writings and podcast at fintechblueprint.com. Rana Gujral, CEO of Behavioral Signals. TEDx speaker, Rana is a serial entrepreneur and a frequent contributor to publications like Fast Company, Inc., The Entrepreneur, and maintains columns in TechCrunch and Forbes. Behavior Signals is venture-backed, including InQtel, CIA, cognitive AI startup developing core technologies for AGI via acoustic-based deep learning. And my good friend, Dr. Riad Hartani, serial entrepreneur and a distinguished expert in technology and innovation. He's currently neck deep in AI data center build-out. Buckle up for an engaging conversation as we unlock new insights into the evolving landscape of AI. Let's start by diving into some of the recent developments, panel. And there are a lot of them. I mean, this is rapidly changing. I think I was researching in the internet time year and things like that. And AI is even more rapid. There's an announcement almost every week. And it's intrigued investors, entrepreneurs, governments, heads of states. Yeah, the big AI summit in Paris had all the world leaders there. And kept everyone on their toes, including corporate leaders. Our goal today is to demystify and break it down so that you are in the know, you as in the audience. Let's start with the state of foundational models and AI infrastructure capacity development. And let me set the stage and get the panel looped in. In early or mostly in 2024, there were only a few US-based LLMs or large language models or foundational models. And the biggest challenge in the expected development in the industry was building the necessary infrastructure, specifically the massive compute power and energy required to support them, and the application or agents on top. The agents were the value-added piece. So there was a lot of talk about agentic and the capacity. And NVIDIA, the GPU maker, where the infrastructure, kind of the basis of the infrastructure was riding high. It had created trillions of dollars in market cap. Energy was the big talk. There was talk of nuclear fission requirement. Sam Altman even invested, I think, in a company called Oklo, which was using fission to generate energy. Then November, Trump got elected, and one of the big announcements he made was the almost $500 billion investment from various parties for this big initiative, Stargate, a massive AI infrastructure project in Texas with Oracle, Microsoft, OpenAI, and backing from Masasan at SoftBank and some Dubai-based venture capital firm. This was January, and within a few days, DeepSeek, a Chinese company, a Chinese technology company backed by hedge funds, and we'll talk about that, dropped a model on a Friday that changed the game, or at least created enough noise. So Rana, maybe you can take it us from here. I've set the stage. How real is DeepSeek, and how does it impact the foundational model evolution?
Yeah, I think we've been fairly enamored by the whole DeepSeek development. There's been a lot of chatter, and I, for one, I think I've been talking about it quite a bit over the last few weeks. I think the thing to sort of keep in mind is that just like any other breaking news, sometimes it gets hyped in either directions, and so you sort of heard things from an aspect of, well, it's a destroyer of value creation by these giants, and the playing field's been leveled, and you sort of see the stock price get hit. Two, it's a complete scam. They just copied, they cheated. There's nothing to see there. And I think none of those things are true once you look deeper. It is. It is a fairly substantial development, and I think it is from a standpoint of focusing on different angles. And what DeepSeek's done, I've written about this quite a bit, so I'm not going to go into that much detail, but they've had a new focus on different approaches, right? So they've done a few things, um, ranging from a smarter training architecture. Now we can get into the whole distillation and the small model and whether they actually spent 6 million on building everything. Again, there's a lot of hype there. So that's not necessarily the right way to look at it. But what they did with the smarter training architecture, their use of the sparse attention mechanisms is very cool. And I think, unlike the dependencies of these larger labs on dense attention, it's a game changer. And so I think that's pretty cool and that's pretty crucial. And there's also now a more sort of pronounced focus on reinforcement learning and the reinforcement learning centric training, and building sort of these reward engines that are more sort of prioritized on task specific outcomes, which I believe is really the way to go. The other cool things I saw from this lab is a very sort of modular model design, which is sort of plug and play. And you compare that with OpenAI's designs, which are very monolithic. And so it's sort of a single model that handles all, and DeepSeek sort of more sort of domain specific heads for coding, for the math and the logical reasoning with a shared backbone network. And I think the big win was open source, right? So the strategic use of the open source resources. I think, DeepSeek kind of sort of leads that spectrum from a perspective that, not only the models are open source, but the weights are also open source. And I think it's a big win. I mean, it's even a bigger win than, say, Llama and Claude, which are open source models. So I think that's sort of the big story is there's real innovation. The closer you look, you understand these are legit researchers. It's a legit lab. These are real out of box innovative approaches. Is it really doing something with 6 million or 5 million that it took 100 billion for OpenAI to do that? No, that's not the real story, right? Because there's distillation involved, which, by the way, is not necessarily a novel or a unique approach. It's been there for a long time. So we could talk about all of that, but I think it's there's a lot of hype overall, which needs to be unparsed and the onion needs to be peeled.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that. Maybe there are other motivations, just not technology. But before we get to that, um, what I hear Rana say, guys, is it's definitely a refinement. There's some good, cool stuff. It's not earth-shattering, but there's a refinement. Obviously, someone building later has that advantage of hindsight and improvement and refinement. There's some good. He listed a bunch of stuff. Dense tension, the modular seems like pretty good, and leverage of the reinforcement learning. Um, any one of you having more points or a counter to what Rana is saying before kind of I get into any motivations or larger schemes that happen behind this?
Yeah, I'm happy to give kind of a bit of color because, so I run Generative Ventures, which is an early stage fund, and my partners are based in Asia. And so I was actually last week in Beijing and Shanghai. And since we focus on crypto as sort of the last technology that's international and global and open source. So I'm excited to have collaborators from the US, the UK, Europe, France, Brazil, China, Japan, Korea. It's fantastic. Everyone but North Korea, I'm very happy for. And it was really interesting to get a feeling for how Chinese investors and LPs think about DeepSeek. Their capital markets have been absolutely battered over the last kind of 4 years after Alibaba got broken. Where the fintech sector was this big leader globally, with Ant Financial being the best super app in the market. And the IPO of Alibaba being sort of politically restricted and Jack Ma being shifted, out of power, made Chinese stocks very unattractive. That said, the technology sector is absolutely spectacular and really, really strong. And what I saw in kind of the last week that I was there was how DeepSeek was just a source of really deep pride for people, because they don't have the GPUs. Those are not allowed to be brought into China. They don't have the same access to technology, and they were under pretty severe constraints, were able to be very, very clever about achieving results. And so there's been, I think, a deep pride about that and a reflection of that optimism across the technology companies. So people are looking again in a new way at Alibaba, at Tencent, at Baidu, at the whole host of Chinese companies, which now are all DeepSeek companies because it's open source. There is no commercialization other than to put it into these big tech footprints. And then you layer on top, of course, the hardware supply chain that they have, which is very strong. And you start to get to a very multipolar world, which I think does break a lot of assumptions about what AI means.
Gotcha. Thank you, Lex. Amy, you work with a lot of emerging markets, including East. Do you share that sentiment, or did you see that sentiment as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I second what Lex mentions. It's one of the points that I really wanted to make because I think it's quite interesting how quickly we've seen this bottom-up nationalism really starting to form in China, and much healthier way to do it than, say, like a top-down push that I think we've tried to see in the past. They've needed this a bit. If we look at the markets over the last couple of years here, we've had this slowing of the Chinese economy. We've had the real estate situation, job loss, unemployment rates are relatively high there, specifically in the young population. And I do think just this indication of DeepSeek and some of the momentum it creates in the market, we have some excitement again in the tech stocks. I mean, some of that a little bit of a beta run here, but we do see companies even like Alibaba announcing over $50 billion to try to go head to head against the Stargate project. So I do think it's something to keep our eye on. And even as Lex said, that manufacturing, supply chain they have too is very strong. I think that's quite interesting to continue to look at as this keeps evolving, as we see hardware developments, we start talking a little bit more about edge AI, robotics. We've been waiting to really define a little bit more what this China 3.0 looks like. And this DeepSeek is really giving us a starting point here to help us do that.
Great. No, thank you. Riad, bringing you into the conversation, I think Rana kind of talked about a lot of the design improvements in DeepSeek, from dense attention to the leverage of reinforcement learning and the modular architecture, kind of more smarter training, if you will. The soundbite that stood out was obviously it took 5 million. They could do it without or with the GPU research. And Rana in his comments refuted some of them. They might have been exaggerated or not accurate. But kind of stepping back from the noise, looks like the energy and the infrastructure capacity requirements was less or is less in the DeepSeek case, or it's optimized, if you will. Is that fair, or is that kind of because the base model is there and that has used up so much and this is kind of leveraging that? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, no, sure. If you look at it, just to step back a little bit, first of all, it's not only DeepSeek. Maybe it was the first one to go and announce. A number of others came out, after that, Alibaba, ByteDance, but also in France, Mistral, and a few others, right? So I think what's important here is really what's the implication of that. One can go back to the technology and see how good and how innovative, but really, what's the implication on that on multiple angles? The first one is open source versus closed source. What's going to be evolving, in terms of choices for developers and application, the deployments. Second one would be on the performance of all these AI models. What's the impact on performance and functionalities and how that evolving? Another one that's key is really who's going to win the business. I mean, now it's technology. We're going into business and who's going to win it. And another one is what you brought up is the investments in terms of digital infrastructure, could be data center or connectivity around it or whatever. And that's something I'm very involved with, right? So they're all interesting questions. But if you look at it like one by one, as far as open source, closed source, I think this angle is going to be very, very good to look at, because typically if you have open source models that come to market and you have few of them today, at least 3, 4, that key solutions, key models coming as open source. You go to Hugging Face now, you have like hundreds of thousands of open source models doing AI, right? But the most significant ones is that they have few of them. If you manage to get that in the hands of developers and they adopt them, it's going to be very difficult for the closed source model to compete. So it's going to be very interesting to watch how that evolves. A second one, as far as functionalities, right? Things like reinforcement learning, distillation, many other things. You see that a lot of the models that are out there are starting to converge as far as how they do things. They're releasing every 2-3 weeks new models, but we're seeing a sort of convergence on how good they are, what problems they're good at solving, and also what problems that they're not able to solve as far as talking artificial intelligence. So that's another dimension to look at. In terms of who's going to win the market, it's very interesting, because typically what you're going to see is really models building technology, developing technology, but then you need the distribution channels to take them to market. You need very different dynamics in terms of B2C, getting the hands of users. To do that, you would need this channel to get you in the hands of billions of customers. But when it comes to the enterprise, let's say a B2B type business, it's likely to be very fragmented and likely see another layer on top of these LLMs that will be focused on verticals, on domains, and just like we've seen in the SaaS space in the cloud generation like 10 years ago up till today, right? But when you jump to the other angle, which relates to investments, if you track data center investments over the last 10 years, it's been huge, basically, right? Before the AI wave, I think you had a lot of investment coming in the cloud space, with mostly the hyperscalers building in 50, 60, 70 countries, their cloud zones. A lot of that got augmented to deploy AI workloads, GPUs as a service, augmenting these clouds to run all this AI, and it's been phenomenal the last 2 or 3 years. Now the key question: are these new developments leading to conclusion that you would need less compute, storage, network to run that, or not? I think it depends a lot on what you're doing with these data centers, like training data centers, inference data centers. It depends a lot on where these data centers are built and who is the audience around it, and all the constraints as far as privacy, regulation, data security, and all of that. So what I think will happen, back to your question, is really you will see this growth in data centers still, mostly driven by hyperscalers, but a lot of regional hyperscalers as well that we've seen all over the place, as well as tier twos that are domain specific. However, what is different today versus 2-3 years ago with this new AI development is regions where this will happen and how they're going to be built and what the return of investment will be very different compared to what we thought like a couple of years ago. So that, I think, the key implication as far as investment in the digital infrastructure.
Okay, that's a good point. And I think we'll talk about this later, but I think Satya Nadella, CEO of Microsoft, kind of talked about the value creation, right? Not just infrastructure capacity build out. And I think that will drive some of the demand supply dynamic, I think. But we'll get to that. Before we close out this kind of topic, right? I know Amy and Lex kind of had the positive, and it is positive for China and the emerging markets to have kind of like a win, if you will, on the DeepSeek. But the skeptical side of me, the cynical side of me, is the timing suspicious, right? It came right on the tail of the big $500 billion Stargate announcement, and Trump, the newly elected president, and Trump's kind of has all this tariff things going on. And including with China, but with others as well, right? And DeepSeek's the narrative, one of the narrative creation was that they could do it in spite of the export control on GPUs, right? And that might not have been true with the Singapore angle and all that, but that was one of the narrative creation. And DeepSeek was owned by a Chinese hedge fund, which apparently shorted Nvidia stock on that Friday or before, had short positions, and Nvidia lost like about 10%, but that's like $500 billion. Um, and so that's a lot of wealth transferred within a week and stuff. So the whole thing looks very fishy and suspicious. Lex, you work in venture capital, meaning not a hedge fund, but sort of. Meaning this is kind of how hedge funds do. Timing is everything. So what do you think about that angle?
Well, I think at the time of recording, NVIDIA has made up the market cap back, and I think the reaction to the news. I mean, everybody, I'm sure, has different perceptions of what it means, but I think it was an overreaction in the sense of, having a really performant open source model that shifts the game from training to inference isn't bad for hardware providers. It just means that we went forward in time by 3 to 5 years, which is fantastic for everybody. I think the more notable part isn't like market manipulation on the part of this company, but rather that a financial firm actually did something for once ever at all to be relevant in AI, as opposed to, no offense to Ernst & Young, buying Ernst & Young hours to implement enterprise software. And so I think it's fantastic. There are only a couple of handful of organizations in the world, financial organizations in the world, that have the level of quant talent that's concentrated enough to do anything meaningful in this space. And I think an interesting exercise is actually to just pause and figure out who they are. So one of the weirdest charts I've seen was the ownership of H100 clusters, and one of the kind of the top owners in the world is a company called XTX Markets out of London. They use it for high frequency trading, and they have as many GPUs as Tesla, if not more. So that's interesting. And then obviously DeepSeek is just another version of XTX or Citadel or Jump. Like, it's a big quant computation machine that happened to go on a side quest and saw an ARB opportunity with OpenAI technology. Maybe they profited off of it, maybe not. But the more interesting thing is, like, this is the type of finance firm, the one that buys huge data centers of GPUs to train AIs, that is going to win in the next 20 years. Not the human financial advisor offices, not the lending branches, not the cash ATMs, but these guys running huge data centers with AI models.
Yeah. Amy, anything to add to what Lex said?
Yeah, I think it's a missed thing that hasn't been covered. I've seen it in a couple different areas, but I don't know if it's really getting enough attention to that point. It's not that the hedge fund invested in DeepSeek. Highflyer is DeepSeek. They share the employees, and to Lex's point, it's very unique situation that we have talent that runs an entirely different industry, but also has this hybrid expertise of technology where they can build and then also test in action within their industry if it works or not. I mean, typically that doesn't happen. I 100% agree with Lex. Even when I sit on our innovation council, many times when we go to Silicon Valley or other places, we talk to technology specialists or builders, and they say, hey, is this useful to you? How about this new tool? Is this useful to you? And this is an entirely different dynamic where they're actually building basically side by side with a different industry. So that definitely is quite unique. Maybe just to offer one other aspect and to talk about history a little bit, I always think about when we had the smartphone development, when iPhone came out, there was constantly IP focus. They were fighting constantly in Asia about the open source nature that developed around smartphones. And it was always the philosophy in China and more across Asia that you had this open source model, you changed batteries, you put different cameras on things. They had that if you went to Shenzhen, you could basically build a Frankenstein smartphone that was perfect to your needs. And there was a use case for that in emerging markets. One, it could be low cost, again, batteries that could be changed in and out, that was just not offered through the Western offering of that same smartphone. So I think the other thing too is everyone's constantly who's the winner, and it could actually be both at the end of the day, which is something that I think we need to keep just kind of front of mind. It's not black and white. It's not winner loser. This can bring like the entire industry forward and have implications for different parts of the world in different ways.
Well put, Amy. Meaning it can be a zero sum, right? We can all be winners. So that's well put. I want to switch gears a little bit. I think DeepSeek takes a lot of oxygen, and maybe rightly so. But kind of talk a little bit. My audience is very kind of tech savvy, but the AI world's very technical. There are a lot of new terms. So I was thinking, let's establish some foundation. I'll maybe ask Rana or Riad to kind of do that. Maybe Rana, you can start. So. We talk about models getting smarter. They can reason. So it was not only DeepSeek that was reasoning, but Chat or OpenAI released their O1 or the operator, and models are becoming multimodal. So it's just not the language domain. Obviously, for a driver kind of AI driver, it needs to be able to hear and see and reason traffic signs and things like that. And then there is agentic architecture, kind of the app layer or the agent layer that was already in vogue, and now it's even bigger. There's a lot of agentic frameworks. So there's reasoning. We talked a little bit about reinforcement learning, which is more of a training technique. Multimodal modal models, and so Rana, can you break this down? How does this all fit together? From a layman, I mean, not somebody who's in machine learning or building AI, but somebody maybe potentially trying to understand and leverage it in their company. Can you kind of give an overview, please?
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack there. I mean, the foundation models have been the star of AI for the last couple of years, right? But they're just not the LLMs anymore. That's not the whole story. I mean, we're seeing emergence of multimodal foundational models, as you just said. It can handle text, images, speech, even sensor data. And so what you kind of see is, a bunch of sort of themes emerging. And I'll talk about reasoning and agentic AI after. But the first is sort of the hardware versus software limits, right? So we're raced to bigger parameter counts. We're hitting the diminishing returns. And unless we innovate in hardware, which I think is going to be the next focus, right? The quantum accelerators, the photonic chips, and other aspects of the training paradigms, which is like curriculum learning. I mean, that's kind of sort of where things are going to start to get focused on. And then there is this big aspect of ethical legal friction. I mean, training at scale often requires scrapping billions of documents and images. And you're already sort of starting to see some of the lawsuits being triggered and the pushback from content owners. And so I predict we'll see major labs pivot to licensed data repositories and specialized synthetic data within the next 12 to 18 months. Start of fall to already see some of that happening. Related to that is also domain-specific AI. I mean, these models are starting to spin off on specialized variants. You sort of see the Bloomberg GPT for finance and the NASA's climate-focused LLM. And so the big question is whether these, specialized offshoots can surpass the performance of the single all-purpose model fine-tuned on domain data. So I think remains to be seen. and we'll see sort of how that progresses. But talking about reasoning specifically, when we say reasoning model, we're talking about AI architectures designed to chain logical inferences, recall facts, do multi-step problem solving, and often in ways that mimic human deduction. And so you're looking at a bunch of different components, right? So you're looking at the transformer backbones, and a lot of these capabilities were sort of in the paper, and now they're sort of being unpacked and implemented. And so you're looking at, building specific chain of thought prompting, step-by-step solutions. For example, let's break this puzzle down into smaller steps. So you sort of see some of that into the newer reasoning models that are coming together. And what you also saw coming out from DeepSeek, which is the modular components, right? So, some labs integrate a symbolic layer or a knowledge graph, letting the AI reference structured facts like, math axioms and domain rules, rather than relying purely on just pattern matching, which is, I'd say, the way to go. And that's why I think that, just dismissing what came out of the DeepSeek labs as, querying and training a smaller model and cheating is just not being very smart. I mean, there's some real innovation there. So there's a lot of different things to sort of think about. Agentic AI is, I think, that's a natural evolution, right? So when you sort of think about, and you and I were talking about reasoning and where does it fit? Is it foundational? Is it on the agentic AI side? We had a bunch of exchange on that. So I'd say, think of reasoning as a fundamental cognitive engine, right? So it's a baseline skill set for problem solving across domains, whether it's math or comprehension, legal analysis. And agentic AI, at least the way I see it, is more of an application layer. So it's like a wrapper, like AutoGPT. And it's basically harnessing these reasoning capabilities, but also giving model specific instructions to act, like, say, search the web, call APIs, chain tasks. But the underlying logic is still very much the domain of the foundational reasoning model, right? So, the question is, like, how much of autonomy is there, and how much of sort of like the autonomy versus cognition problems have we solved? And I see that autonomy means deciding goals and taking external actions, and cognition, the reasoning, of the engine that interprets instructions and infers and plans steps. And so I think currently what you kind of sort of see is a lot of these models' capacity to interpret commands and break down tasks into subtasks, but that's evolved, but the model itself hasn't changed. It's still performing under the hood, like mostly step-by-step reasoning within a loop. And it's not necessarily free will. It's still very much an automation. I mean, many agentic frameworks have revolved around that. And so they're looking to hook up models to external APIs, like open a browser, search this and all that. It's impressive, but it's still, as I said, mostly automation and not free will. And we're not quite at the stage where the AI spontaneously devise new goals or step outside the bounds of the programming to, say, meaningfully alter real world environments despite, sensational headlines. So I think that's sort of the big news there. I mean, I think is, again, everything gets hyped, but it's pretty impressive. I was actually chatting with a senior exec at SAP last night, and we're sort of talking about sort of how is this going to change the market dominance of these firms. I mean, when these agentic AIs really come to, it's through true sort of delivery of value, a lot of these things are going to be challenged. So I'll stop there. I mean, I could go deeper into other aspects, but I think there's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I like to draw analogies from the past, right? So I think reasoning, obviously very, very higher cognition, but it's akin to kind of a rules engine in the previous kind of software world, where a lot of kind of if then else kind of situations there. Agentic, I guess, closer to RPA or workflow automation. But you talked about domain specific models, right? So you can have a generic ERP that, like SAP, that can be customized, or you can have domain-specific ERPs, right? So LLMs versus domain-specific models. And then you talked about synthetic data. So these are, and reasoning obviously will be an important kind of capability as these models get built out, and they'll probably evolve in dimension, right? It's just not language reasoning; it may be spatial or like spatial reasoning as well. So this is good. I'm going to ask Lex and Amy kind of on the invest in the buy side of these, right? What excites them most? But before I go there, Riad, anything else besides what Rana listed? And he listed a few things in AI.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he listed a few and a number of other things. It's interesting to see, I mean, what happens in AI. I mean, if you go back in time, I talk about myself here. I did my thesis, my PhD in AI in 1995. And my PhD at that time, AI was primarily symbolic at the pre-90s, right? And my thesis was really try to bring in neural networks and numerical AI into the whole equation and move from supervised learning, data to learn, to reinforcement learning, right? So that happened then. And then if you fast forward the last 20, 30 years, AI moved primarily into data, supervised learning, machine learning, less symbolic, less reinforcement and all of that, but the techniques were there. And you fast forward to today, 20, 25, 30 years after, we're seeing reinforcement learning coming back. We're seeing symbolic, logic-based, Boolean logic, fuzzy logic, probabilistic logic, possibilistic logic coming back. Actually, most of these models now, when they do the reinforcement learning, they're having logic-based functions to basically look at the cost and the reinforcement, all of that. So it's very interesting how things go in cycles and how things evolve. And I think you have to really look at it from a macro perspective and say the techniques are one thing and they're evolving based on the problems to solve, based on the data available, based on the cost and the compute and what's available to run it. And I think that will keep evolving. Where we are today, I think if you fast forward 2-3 years down the road, or maybe even beyond that, I think we're going to see an evolution towards new models. I mean, you see today, like, with DeepMind, for example, alpha geometry, where they're using other techniques to go and solve problems. Because really, I think with AI, it's always two things. It's one thing is to solve problems with the right economics and come up with decisions. And second one is how to tackle problems that cannot be solved or haven't been solved. Actually, there is a joke that we used to bring up all the time when we talk about AI. We say, we as long as things don't work, we call them AI. As soon as they work, we call them something else. So, for example, if you look at robotics and pattern recognition and vision and speech recognition, I mean, all of them used to be. I mean, if I go back to my grad school days, they were all in the AI groups, AI research, AI development, and then they become their own fields. And I think that's what will happen. So if you fast forward, like, the few years down the road, I think it's really how to get AI to be a tool out of many other tools under some framework to solve problems. Go to the enterprise, you have to plug into processes, you're going to have to plug into workflows, you're going to have to combine AI with other things. It's not just like a one thing that solves all the problems. And I think that's what you will see is the integration, is getting into business, getting into deployments. And that's maybe the most important thing moving forward.
Gotcha. So as I gave heads up, Amy and Lex, and either of you can go first, kind of one from an investment perspective and one from kind of buying or kind of using it within the enterprise perspective, or you can kind of switch the perspectives as well. So I wrote down synthetic data, domain-specific model. I think he took the example of Bloomberg GPT, but could be kind of Morgan Stanley, or like all enterprises could have their own kind of domain-specific model. Then of course reasoning, it's kind of a core competency, and then agents, right? Agents to do this, agents to do that, and building autonomy. Maybe all knowledge work or SaaS, for example, can be replaced by agents. So from your perspective, what excites you the most? What are you seeing when you go out there and look at AI companies? Your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I can kick it off and maybe just to continue on the last point on deployment. I mean, this is an area we're just looking at in so many ways. Like, where does this actually get deployed? What's monetizable too? Or is it just businesses actually being able to save their market share at a certain point? I think that's a question just in terms of like where that settles out for different companies. On the investment side, we'll look across the entire tech stack. So semiconductor investments, cloud infrastructure, the foundational models. I mean, Rana was talking about agentic, those orchestration models, and then the application layer, right? So you have the entire stack that we can actually go and find investments to make and deploy capital. And again, we're only deploying capital on the public side at this point. We're very lucky in the emerging markets. We have a lot of areas to tap on this. So even though EM's been left for dead, I would say in some portfolios, specifically if you're talking to US investors, there's so much concentration in the US right now, where we actually are quite excited about some of the opportunities we're seeing in EM. But it does apply, and Lex brought this point up before, this is very disruptive to our actual business itself. So I have continued to bring talent into the team. We have an individual that just came on last year that was working with a startup focused on machine learning and AI, replicating what fundamental investment managers do. And we're starting to look at that more and more. We also discussed the whole concept of quantimental, or what we're calling quantimental 3.0, which is this crossroads of quant tooling and fundamental investing is looking very different than it would before. Fundamental managers typically don't want to be confused with quant managers. They're typically a world away. But when you look under the hood, it's starting to be a much more hybrid dynamic than we've ever seen before. I would highlight, and one of the things I always speak about is talent. I do think there's continuously a shortage of talent, or talent that can really cross these intersection areas. So if you look at business schools, even undergrad programs, we need business graduates that are coming with coding understanding, computer science backgrounds, and financial understanding. That still is, I don't want to say it's hard to find, but it's still not the priority coming out of these business schools. It's still kind of in the old school financial modeling that has been around for decades, and it's changing. And we need that technology in the academic community to catch up with where we are on the front lines.
No, that's great perspective, and thanks for sharing that, Amy. I think this is good information for business leaders, right? You have to retool, reskill your team. It's not just about adopting AI. You have to bring the right kind of human capital, right? There's a cliche, AI is a human problem or something like that. And I like that because it's how you leverage AI, right? AI is not just going to do things itself. So that's great perspective from kind of just a boardroom and executive team strategy.
And Patty, if I could just add one more point that
Sure.
I forgot to mention is on the data and data quality. Unfortunately, all legacy industries, their data is not as clean as we need it. So the amount of time that we need to spend preparing to use a lot of these tools is overwhelming. So I think there's this assumption that we can just put it on top of the data sets we have if it's a closed model, or if we're using something else. But even if we're just simply looking at it for a specific function, we need that data to be clean, to be useful. And a lot of teams and a lot of industries are not set up. So that's going to be a big lift going forward here as some of these new tools roll out.
Great. No, it's a data problem. Yes. And data is critical. Lex, I know you have to leave us a little early to pick up your kids, and some of us are going to stay a little bit over. I need to give you a little bit more airtime now. Talk about what excites you in the things that we talked about. And I know you're big in digital assets, or the intersection of digital assets and digital intelligence, or AI. So address that as well, kind of your investment theses.
Yeah, sounds great. Yeah, I'm gonna go pick up my human children, not AI robots, one day. So I think to kind of come at the question a little bit sideways is I started my career in finance. My first job was at Lehman Brothers. I was trained to make those Excel spreadsheets that we talked about, and then over time drifted into being a fintech founder, and then drifted into neobanks in the UK, and then towards Ethereum and crypto, and now towards the frontier of let's say blockchain-based systems for artificial intelligence and for hardware devices, decentralized physical infrastructure networks. And so I'm sort of all the way out there in the fog playing science fiction investor. And it's a fantastic time to do that because there's a lot of things that people are building. I mean, there are thousands of people building in this very niche place where I'm looking. I think I've chased platform shifts in trying to direct where my attention is going, because a lot of fintech has been extremely incremental. It has been kind of a polishing of existing core banking systems, existing portfolio management systems, existing card network rails, the same old house of cards that's been there for 40 or 50 years. And these systems work, but in the internet transformation, we had a platform shift where literally the entire media industry was deplatformed and went down 80%. And then a new platform emerged in the media internet that delivered everything at the cost of zero to literally everybody. And in finance, this has not happened. I mean, we're kind of pushing against it, but it's not happened. And platform shifts are really different from these incremental kind of repackagings. I love SoFi and Revolut and Betterment and Chime and great fun companies putting old investment products into the phone, but they're not a big platform shift. And I think what we're getting to closer and closer, and you can make fun of people who say the word singularity and so on, but what we're getting closer and closer to a shift in our economy that is much more profound. And so I think the positions you want to play in AI are twofold. It's either as close to manufacturing as possible, the biggest, most general model possible, as close to the edge of devices as possible. And this is clear in the value accrual of NVIDIA and OpenAI, rendering most others somewhat irrelevant. Not the vertically, trained models for this, and that, but rather the most general model possible that is then pointed at particular domains. And then the other place that's safe is distribution. Like, own as much of the distribution as you can. OpenAI is amazing in this way because they did the Apple trick. They built the tech and they got the distribution really fast. None of the other model providers outside of big tech, like Anthropic and so on, have meaningful distribution yet. And so I think that's where they're really sticky. A company like Morgan Stanley or Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan is extremely sticky on the distribution side, and can, end of the day in the future, can swap out manufacturing to something else. If it's no longer Warren Buffett fundamental and it's, hybrid Centaur quantamental models, God bless. The investment manager is now, ChatGPT, but the distribution is still in place and it still has a person to talk you through why the robot thinks you should buy a whole bunch of Chinese equities. Anyway, so that's kind of my thought on positioning. I think everything that's intermediary, supply chain, enterprise workflow, things are so complicated and so on. I mean, it's not that it's not profitable. I think it'll just get obliterated into oblivion because if it's a platform shift, then none of that stuff even matters. So that's high level. And then applied, I mean, again, we're looking at things that are very far out. We're really interested in what Web3 based economic systems and financial infrastructure can build to can bring to an AI world. At the core of our thesis is the idea that AI is going to be one of the main drivers of GDP in the world for the next 5 to 10 years. Things associated with AI across energy and hardware and so on, but largely kind of machine creativity and machine economic creation and all of those goods and services are digital. It's text, it's images and videos, it's music. Those are things that we don't have a great way to own and trade other than on blockchains. And so we believe that ownership and economic activity and market venues and payments and sort of access, all those things kind of come prepackaged on blockchains. And so we're looking at stuff that attaches those capabilities to AI companies and AI agents. There's a bunch of stuff that kind of takes the Bitcoin ethos of decentralization and privacy to manufacturing models, decentralized networks for inference, decentralized networks to create training data or to do labels. And I think that stuff is interesting and it might work out. But really the core of it is to ask the question of like, what is the financial industry for the machine future? Who is going to be doing that? And how are we going to be interacting with it? Are we still going to be faxing, like ACAT forms to the back office of BNY Mellon? Or are we going to have lightning fast API access, with millions of transactions per second between billions of robots, software robots on the internet? And so that's the kind of idea we're positioning for.
No, that's great. Very profound, Lex, if I may say, very beautiful and very deep, and lot to unpack. I know we're limited on time, but maybe I'll ask you this. To your original point around kind of go generalist rather than domain specific and focus on distribution, right? It's well articulated and well put. For information-based businesses like banking and financial services, insurance, and other things, I can see it makes sense. But what about kind of science-based stuff like healthcare or drug discovery? Do you see some value in more verticalized AI development? Meaning, obviously, there are a lot of drug discovery AI platforms now, which are worth like, oh, they raised like $1 billion already. So there's some traction or some progress there. But any thoughts? And maybe you're not tracking that, which is okay. But any thoughts or comments on that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think another example would be like the coding platforms, right? The Cursor is monetizing really well. There's Devin, Lovable, a whole bunch of companies in the sort of 50 to 100 million ARR range that have seemingly come out of nowhere. And if you look at their marketing, it's AI specialized for code development. If you look under the hood, what's going on is that they're taking Claude, or they're taking DeepSeek, or they're taking OpenAI models. They're plugging them into a GUI, a user interface, and then they're building a whole bunch of kind of like save, revert workflows on top, and then they're using that to push really hard into a market segment. So to me, that's a distribution play. I am distributing, this general intelligence. I can always swap out the model, right? Anytime Claude gets an upgrade, I get the latest one, and so on and so forth. But the push is to verticalize them and then grab those customers and the attention of those customers, because right now it is still pretty much a blue ocean. You can get them fast. I think the mistake would be to say, like a model for coders should only be trained on code, right? Rather than a model for coders should be trained on the entire corpus of human knowledge and the whole internet. And like, if you really push the model for coders on questions like, how do I make an omelet? And like, why does this picture of my toe look red? Like, it'll answer it because it's a general model. So I'm all about, vertical distribution, and building companies to create very tangible value and be super applied. And I think that's great. But I think, I had the thesis in the past that like what's the finance GPT? But I think end of the day, the finance GPT is GPT with someone packaging it nicely for finance.
Awesome. And Lex, I know you have to go pick up your kids. Any closing thoughts, and where can people find you? I already plugged in FinTech Blueprint. Do you want to leave any contact information for our audience?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on, and a pleasure to meet everybody else here. I would just leave folks with lots of people are skeptical, and rightly so, because everything's fake and you can't trust anyone. But even in that environment, I think people should try to maintain their curiosity for what's possible. We're living in a profoundly interesting time. You know, we're walking around with super intelligence in our pockets and instant global financial rails to every country in the world. I mean, it's the stuff of science fiction. And everybody's very cynical and upset and angry about, like, does my stock go up or does your stock go up, and so on. So I would just advise people to be super curious. It's a moment of like great creativity. And we're always excited about meeting entrepreneurs. So thank you very much.
Sure. Thanks, Lex. Kind of switching gears, but maybe not so much, because Lex alluded to that a little bit around distribution vertical and kind of building the general models. I want to switch a little bit into applications and which applications are kind of the or excites you the most, right? So I have a list. Meaning one of the things I talk about, and I see it on LinkedIn, others, is the whole SaaS or software as a service market will get disrupted with agents. There'll be an agent for every kind of SaaS or vertical SaaS. And of course, humanoids, right? Figure the humanoid or robot company is launching Tesla. He has a very aggressive um, kind of target of releasing a lot of humanoids into the market. The people talk about this Cambrian explosion, just like we had the cell phones. Every household maybe will have robots or humanoid in the very near future. We're talking less than 5 years. Whether that'll happen, I don't know. And what will they do, the robots? And then, of course, there's defense, which Rana, maybe you can speak within what you can talk about there. There's education, entertainment, Amy, financial service and asset management. We covered it a little bit. Entertainment. I know there is a K-pop group. My daughter is big into K-pop, and one of the and I forget their name, but they're using AI to generate music, and that's kind of the tip of the iceberg. I have written about this Genflix concept where instead of Netflix or folks like Netflix tracking what you like and then recommending a show that you will like, they'll kind of generate the show on the fly based on your preferences. So are we kind of close to that, right? And so that will fundamentally change entertainment. And of course, drug discovery, healthcare, we talked about. So there's a lot. I rattle on a lot, but I'll ask you to comment. What excites you most? What have you seen? Any examples you want to share for our audience of where you see AI being applied really to create value? Who wants to go first?
I can go. I think there's a lot of exciting stuff happening. I mean, I think the talk of the day is, and we'll talk about defense tech in a bit, is the agents of the service model, right? So there's lots of buzz. And I think what you're seeing is the plugin explosion. You can call it the Cambrian explosion, right, of agentic add-ons. I mean, so from OpenAI's ChatGPT plugins to custom enterprise solutions. And so these modules, they promise to automate tasks across CRM, ERP, even code deployment. And that is going to be a disruptive force, and I think fairly exciting one. And then you sort of see some defensive moves by the SaaS giants, right? So you expect Salesforce, Workday, and others to build and buy their own agentic layers. The question is, I mean, can they adapt quickly enough to avoid being disrupted by the nimble AI first competitors? Because it's more of a DNA thing at this point. And then there's a lot of consolidation happening. I mean, so I predict a wave of consolidation in 2025 where, a lot of these big players are going to acquire these best-in-class agent platforms, and they're going to try to build these AI mega suites that integrate seamlessly across the enterprise stack. So you start to sort of see that happening already. I mean, in fact, this was the conversation I had late in the night with one of the execs. It was, really, there's a lot of back and forth in terms of sort of where this is headed. Now, aside from that, I mean, if you break up the usual, AI in finance and AI in education chatter, and look something like something a little bit more beyond that. I mean, you sort of see, neuromorphic research really coming to its foray, and a handful of startups are blending the spiking neural networks with large-scale transformers to mimic, brain-like computations. I mean, we play a little bit in that as well. And the question is, could this yield leaps in pattern recognition for, say, higher frequency trading, drug discovery, even with the current compute restrictions? So I think that's remains to be seen. And then there's a lot of policy-based simulation. I mean, where I thought that was pretty exciting. I mean, there was like one example where I saw the entire legislative outcomes are predicted and tested in a sim. Sounds very dystopian, but I think some of the governments are already sort of using the predictive analytics to shape policy, and the next step to generate the what if scenarios. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that, but I mean that's there. And then
Almost like
and
an
I think
AI based digital twin is what you're talking about.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean test out population. I don't know how many of you guys remember the Universe 25 experiment from the 70s.
Yeah.
So not fun. I mean it's exciting, but I think it plays out. The part I'm excited about is the hyper personalized entertainment, right? So this is like the streaming platforms testing AI that auto generates short form content curated to your taste and my taste, and beyond standard recommendations. And I think the line between user content creation, AI hyper tailoring might vanish. So I think that's going to be very exciting, and I think something I look forward to. Um, I think, and then so this is all sort of like forward looking. What's happening right now? I mean, we're doing some cool stuff with the intelligence agencies. A lot of stuff I can't talk about. These are classified projects. But one thing I'll sort of say, so the general trend is sort of like, where our focus is in unraveling what's happening inside the human mind, right? So we focus on tapping into various emotions, behaviors, thought process, decision-making intent, and we built these specialized neural nets to do that through multiple different modalities, primarily tone, but others as well. And what you see is like, so when you're thinking about how a human brain is, a lot of this is trending towards decision making, either augmenting or just making the decision using AI. It could be mission critical decisions, it could be other decisions. How does the human brain make decisions? The human brain makes decisions in two forms. There's the systems one thinking, then the systems two thinking. A lot of the work that was done by Daniel Kahneman, right? If you haven't read the book Machinery of Thought, I highly recommend that. The 95% of the human decision making is systems one thinking, which is intuitive, effortless, natural decision. Almost like you could call that gut feel, right? I mean, it doesn't mean that it's without data. There's a lot of data, but it's a different type of decision making. And the second is the more sort of well understood. This is the number crunching and methodical, effortful. But the vast majority of the AI implementations has been limited to and restricted to systems two up till now, because these cognitive AI engines haven't been really performing really well. And so you're sort of seeing the trends, right? So for example, when we started to think about building these models, our F scores were like about 0. 0.5, 0. 0.6. And that was exciting for a lab and a research paper, but it was sort of stuck there. And then we saw transformers, we saw the spike, and in just a couple of years, we went from 0. 0.5, 0.6 to 0.9, and the human brain is 0.8. So now surpassed human capability and ability. So now these systems one thinking modules are a real thing. So you could combine the systems one and systems two into these very intelligent decision making for mission critical systems. And that's where the AI is headed, right? So the AI is headed towards the intuitive systems one decision making implementations. And you see defense, especially the US government, adopting it. I mean, we're also talking to other intelligence agencies across the world. I mean, NISF, which is parent of MI6, and ONI Australia, and others, Singapore. But US is leading, and it's forward looking, and they think that the mindset is, well, we have no choice. Let's do it. I mean, we got to go. So I think that's very, very exciting. I mean, I kind of sort of see that there's a test bed. I mean, you always need a sponsor, right? So we can build a model, but to get the model to scale, you need a partner, you need data, and you need money, and you need compute. And so that's how sort of some of these things are coming to fruition. So there's lots going on, and I think 2025 is going to be fairly exciting. Even just the first half is going to be very exciting.
Yeah. No, some of it truly is dystopian, but it is what it is. And kind of reading human behavior or reading what's going on in the mind and ability to influence, meaning that's where the money is, right? Commercial, marketing, politics or campaign, persuasion, like what you talked about, the legislative kind of experiment or simulation. Amy or Riad, what's exciting you? Maybe some non-dystopian use cases.
I mean, I'll just have a simple point. I feel like there's a fine line sometimes between like that customization and social engineering, and can humans actually determine, do they even know what is being delivered to them? And I just think about like some of the trends we've seen with social media, with TikTok, or even the issue around Trump, where we lost TikTok for a bit, and then folks went over to Red Note, and you had this very unique dynamic where you had US social media on the same platform as Chinese for a moment, which had its own implication to the Chinese society. Oh, maybe the US isn't as great as I thought it was. Maybe actually security and some of the things that I have here are good, right? Which I don't even think that was the intention, but it actually had this kind of behavioral dynamic on some of the Chinese population. So I guess the question is, how do you control for that? Or will we be able to, without putting too many restrictions on it early on, which will potentially limit the innovation? Because that's always the balance, is how do you have enough guardrails on it that you're protecting humans in this sort of environment, where Rana is making points that it's actually better than some human thought process at this point. And then at the same time, we're still able to explore enough on the innovation side.
Yeah. And Riad, maybe less on the applications. I know you were at the Paris summit where all the world leaders were, and there's this new term, diplomacy. I can barely say it. Technology and diplomacy combined. And that's a rising phenomenon. Can you talk a little bit, kind of what is it and why is it important suddenly?
Yeah, I will get to tech diplomacy in a bit, but before that, just back to your question as far as what how will AI evolve and what will basically run the world and all of that. I think it brings me back to I was involved in building the internet infrastructure. I mean, the first backbone routers in the late 90s, early 2000s. It was the same question: as you build the internet, what sort of application will evolve, right? And we kept asking ourselves, I mean, what would that be? And the reality is we did not know. I mean, the market went in multiple directions, a lot of things happened, and ultimately things popped up, right? I mean, the App Store and many other things, and then applications on top of that. So I think the same is happening with AI. I think you will see AI getting into almost everything incrementally, and over time, some new applications will pop up and will take over the market, right? So that's what I think. Now, to your point on diplomacy, I think this is what we're seeing now is really, you have all these large companies sort of running this AI platforms and running the infrastructure beneath it. And I think ultimately the question is like, how do I go and develop my own AI tools and models and infrastructure? And ultimately not have to negotiate with all these companies. So I think diplomacy is evolving in a sense where you're going to have government or institutions or enterprises having to go and negotiate and deal with a lot of these big companies that are running a lot of the infrastructure, not only countries and governments. I think that would be the definition of diplomacy. But at the same time, see, I really want to step back a little bit in terms of what we see happening over the next few years. I think what I'm most interested in is really what's happening beneath all these AI layers and application layers that will make the infrastructure run and support new applications. We're seeing lots of new developments happening, for example, in the compute space, with anything quantum compute, either superconducting or trapped ions or photonics or many other ways. And that's going to be an interesting race of the next 5-10 years, and we'll see where that goes. Similar in terms of connectivity. If you look at it, you have to get AI in the hands of everyone. So connectivity has to be there. So we see a lot of development, for example, in the space world with low Earth orbit constellations, just to get the internet everywhere. So it's really a mix of multiple things. It's a puzzle, right? And they all have to work together, and you have to mix and match them optimally to get to the right behavior, right solutions over time.
Yeah, but looks like it's more significant than maybe the internet revolution, right? Maybe 80s, 90s. It changed society and things quite a bit. And the applications that were built, like say social media, we could attribute it to political revolutions, information democratization, and so on and so forth. So AI will potentially have those kind of impacts, and maybe
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure it's more important or it's hard to compare. However, what's really interesting, and I remember this from the my old AI days and all the work done in AI. It's really something interesting with AI. It's really, you always have to compare it, or you compare it with human beings. It's all about how to think, how to build intelligence, and that's what makes it very special and very interesting, because you really have the human dimension and you compare AI to that human dimension. That's what makes it very unique in terms of assessment or development and all of that.
yeah. And I know we're running out of time, and we had a couple of other points, but maybe touch on it briefly, maybe take a minute to respond, guys, whoever wants to respond. In that Paris summit that I alluded, one standout moment was the US President J.D. Vance's speech, which cut through the philosophical divide, so to speak, between Europe and US. In his just 15 minutes, Vance delivered this bold, less regulation, more opportunity message, positioning himself and the Trump administration on kind of almost a direct collision course with the Europe's strict AI laws. And it's not just AI. Europeans have been kind of top-down regulatory regime, innovation through regulations, and so on and so forth. So it's almost like a kind of a cultural divide in between or across the pond. Thoughts on that overall on that and JD Vance's and Trump, and I mean they haven't released too much on AI, but any thoughts or comments?
I mean, I can start this. I mean, I'll tell you. I mean, we've been talking about this aspect ad nauseum for the last 3 years. This debate, and certainly there is a big stark. I mean, we spend a lot of time. I personally spend a lot of time in Europe because we're half European, half US company, and we see the stark contrast in the two continents. I think point is that I find this debate very problematic from a perspective that the fundamental question is is this something you can or cannot control? And I believe that you can't control. You can't control innovation. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. And if there was ever a doubt, then the DeepSeek thing should put that to rest. I mean, if you control and restrict access to compute and GPUs, there's going to be other aspects that override that perspective. Even today, so today we have a little bit of an edge, but most of that edge is in infrastructure. It's on the compute and it's on the infrastructure. But infrastructure, maybe not so much even, right? I mean, China has maybe bigger data centers. I mean, so they just haven't been repurposed towards this particular goal. But we definitely have a little bit of an edge on the compute. The compute edge is temporary, right? I mean, and that's why you sort of saw the NVIDIA stock bounce back up. Did it bounce back up because people realized that DeepSeek, level playing field wasn't real? No. I mean, half of it was recovered because of reasoning, right? So the reasoning models came to foray, and reasoning models are more compute intensive, right? So at the end of the day, so there's that reasoning trend which is now using more compute. So you need more compute to do the same amount of things at a higher level of accuracy. And so NVIDIA is like still relevant, and all of these ecosystems are still relevant. So they have sort of gained that back up. But that's a ticking time bomb, right? So at some point, you'd have some sort of an innovation that ekes out maybe 10 times more efficiency with the existing through the existing models, which technically means you need 10 times less compute. And what would be the relevance for these market edges at that point? You haven't seen any major innovation in the spectrum since Transformers, but it's due. I mean, when that comes in, there's a newer architecture. Maybe you don't need GPU for to even model training. I mean, you could come up with a completely different approach. Quantum computing could kill NVIDIA completely, right? Now, we don't know when that happens. It could be another 10 years. But if that happens, you don't need GPUs as much as you do now. So there's a lot of debate. But so the bottom line is, this is going to go forward, right? I mean, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. So are you going to be a part of it? Are you going to sit on the sideline, right? So you could debate the ethics, and you could debate the pros and cons of regulations. But if you're not playing, you're going to win. You're going to lose. And it is a real race, right? So the AGI and ASI are two different ramifications, right? So yes, I mean, so get to AGI is a narrow race right now. It's mostly compute and infrastructure, and there will be many winners. It's not clear if one's going to dominate, right? So we get there in 1 to 3 years, and is going to be the second in line and the third in line, which are going to be very, very close. And there's going to be many AGI implementations, many baby AGIs popping up all around the world with equal competencies. But then there's the post-AGI world, that the 10-year, 20-year, maybe 2-3 decades of post-AGI until we get to ASI, which is when everything changes. That's definitive. Whoever gets to ASI first wins. There is no number two. I mean, you can never catch up. The first ASI module will always be ahead, forever. I mean, theoretically, right? I mean, so the race is not towards AGI, it's eventually to ASI, and that is world dominance. I mean, you are now superior in every aspect: science, medication, defense, everything. Probably the most powerful economy in the world. And I hope it's us. I mean, and I think most of the world would hope it's us, I would think, because right now it's a two-man race, or two-country race, as I should say, right? So that's the goal, that's the dilemma. And I think Europe should have had the wake-up call. And I think that speech was very, very necessary. I think he went a little bit overboard on the security in the Munich side of things. I mean, that was more political. I'll leave that aside. But I think the AI speech I thought was very relevant. I mean, it's like, let's go. I mean, team up. I mean, there's no choice. You have no choice. You can debate the alternatives when you have a choice. Do you really have a choice? I don't think so. And I don't think most of us think I agree, most of us think the same way. So that's my 2 cents on that.
No, that's great. So just to catch up the audience who are not familiar with the term, so AGI, artificial general intelligence, which is kind of human-like capability, and ASI that Rana alluded to, artificial superintelligence, which is kind of beyond human. And he kind of made that distinction. Whoever develops ACI first, that's it. They conquer, they rule in many ways. So it's an interesting perspective. Thanks, Rana, for sharing. I think we need to wrap up, but Amy, the world is more than just US, Europe, and China, and you have good exposure. Where do they sit, kind of more the emerging economies outside of those three? How do they see all this AI war? Do you have that vantage point?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, the thing is, to Rana's point, you're talking about like, who are the largest, who are the most dominant. That doesn't mean there's other players in the space. I spend a lot of time in the Middle East. Middle East has been very active, specifically, around UAE and even Saudi Arabia. Their their FII conference back in the fall made a number of big announcements on data centers. They have energy. They have unlimited energy, so definitely a helpful factor there to consider. So I think, Middle East, something to watch just in terms of where that goes. We talked about all of the customized solutions that need to be built for all the different industries. IT services is going to be a winner there. And a lot of that's coming out of India, right? So is India a player in some of that? So I do think there's other places around the world that have their position in this, that there's investment opportunities, that there's areas for growth. I think the one thing that I would also just point out too, if we look at the emerging economies, the benefits that these tools can create for that population can be exponential relative to where they are now. So I think we always go back to this debate, like in the US, why were they so slow to go to Apple Pay or Touch Pay in the US? It's because credit cards worked relatively well and almost everyone had it. In the emerging world, that wasn't the case. Credit cards didn't have the penetration, formal banking didn't have the penetration. So some of the fintech solutions actually dominated there. So I do think there's more just in terms of the per capita GDP impact that it can have in the emerging markets relative to some of the developed countries.
Okay. And we have only like about 2.5 minutes left. So let's maybe close. And I want to just kind of ask some kind of different closing questions. So, well, definitely leave your contact, social media, where people can reach you, what you're interested in, who you're trying to connect with, that kind of information. But in closing, I'd like to ask you, if you were advising President Trump or his AI czar, David Sachs, or Elon Musk, who seems to be kind of almost like up there in terms of what he's doing with Doge and other things, or somebody like Sam Altman, you can pick who you think you want to advise or who is listening to you, and what would you tell them besides anything else you want to add and close? So Riad, why don't you go first?
Well, I guess it depends what am I advising them on. The answer will be very different. But anyway, no, I think for me, I mean, the way to look at it, I mean, we've talked technology here and AI and who's going to win the infrastructure game or the platform game and all of that. But I think one should shift the landscape a bit and look at the picture from the perspective of AI in the context of problem solving. And I think that's way more global. Different parts of the world, they have their own problems. AI will be bringing part of the solutions. And I think that's sort of like where one should elevate the whole story. I mean, there is a top level question, who's going to win the top game of infrastructure and controlling the value chain at scale. That's one thing. You talk US, China, and a few others, maybe. But then I think more importantly is really how to shift the story in terms of problem solving. Go to Africa and you have like, and I'm doing a lot of work in Africa, lots of problems where AI is today, just like blockchain and a few other techniques are coming in and solving real problems on the ground. Same in Latin America, same in Asia. So the advice there would really relate to this question of having a multi-layer assessment of what to do based on the value you want to bring at the end of it.
Okay, thank you. Amy or Rana, who wants to go next?
Amy, if you want to go, I can go as well. Your call.
Yeah, I mean, maybe just one thing on, I think there's some questions around the export controls. I think that's one of the things that, I mean, some of these controls going even towards some of the developed markets, questions on what their relationships are with other countries around the world. I just think it's a very difficult, it comes off bullying, and then we see outcomes where if you limit people in one area, they find a workaround. So I think the question is, what are we really trying to solve for here? And where can we take a diplomatic position in this discussion around the world rather than just put controls on and try to play the bully?
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you for that. Rana?
Yeah, I think just a few things come to mind. I mean, some of these things I see already happening, so that's good. I mean, there needs to be a heightened level of readiness around AI, which means that translates into funding domestic production of advanced chips and investing in broadband infrastructure. I think that's starting to happen. I think we need to make STEM education a top priority. I think that's going to be relevant for the future. Then there needs to be, a responsible data strategy. So we need to encourage data trust and frameworks that potentially let individuals share data for AI training. And you could potentially do that under clear, fair conditions, maybe even like, attaching some sort of a payment to it. China can just take it, right? We can't. So we have to think out of the box. Then the multilateral alliances. And I think this is where we need to collab and we need to ensure alignment with allies and, on ethics and security. And I think a unilateral approach invites a very fragmented global environment that benefits no one. I think, that's an area that they need to do more on. And lastly, I think is something I haven't seen anybody talk about, which is there needs to be some sort of a public engagement. I mean, we need to have like a national AI literacy campaign so that the average citizen understands what the hell is this about? I mean, how these models work, what they can or cannot do. The lack of understanding fuels both fear and sensationalism, which is really what's happening right now. And because it's going to touch everybody. So it's not necessarily something that, it's not an invention on a SaaS model, right? This is across the board. So I think there's more needs to be done there.
Yeah, no, very good point. Let's end on that. AI literacy, meaning community colleges, more podcasts like this should be talking about AI and what it means for the general population. Thank you, Rana. Thank you, Riad. Thank you, Amy. And thank you, Lex, for being on the FinTech Talk Show.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.